Good morning. Let us now continue our discussion of Mahesh L. Kanjwa's next play, which is not Reflections. It's actually called Desire in the Rocks. So the next play that we'll discuss is called Desire in the Rocks and not Reflections. Now, Desire in the Rocks, I chose this play because there is a continuity, a thematic continuity between the earlier play we discussed, Garbo, and Desire in the Rocks. Let us, first look at what the major theme of this play is. In terms of the fact that in Garbo, if you remember our discussion of Garbo, there was an attempt by Intuk, the professor in the play, to construct Garbo as in his own ideal. He wants to actually construct, Garbo's soul as the place of his own lost and frustrated aspirations. And so the woman is being constructed as an ideal, something that will be a repository of the man's, the professor's lost and frustrated aspirations, a source of everlasting hope, something that will immortalize him, the man. And you see something similar happening in Desire in the Rocks, where again the unconscious in terms of sexuality in the play serves as some kind of a resistance. And this is of course Shomik Bandopadhyay's introduction to Mahesh L. Kanjwa's collected plays, where he very accurately phrases defines the theme of the play as a case where the unconscious in terms of sexuality serves as a resistance to both the behavior and expression frozen into fixed institutionalized meaning. In this case, in Desire in the Rocks, you have an artist as the main character. You had a professor in Garbo, and in Desire in the Rocks, you have an artist who is one of the main characters of the play. And here the artist is the one whose unconscious becomes a site for a drama between the unconscious creative impulses to create a new kind of a social order, perhaps some kind of new expression which would be completely which would rebel against social and moral norms, the moral institutionalized social meaning, right? So the unconscious itself in terms of sexuality serves as resistance, Shomik Bandopadhyay says, to both behavior and expression, frozen into fixed institutionalized meaning, provoking the artist in his quest for creative fulfillment, and which then turns the woman into an embodiment of his desire, in the process also destroying her even as he cuts himself free of her. Now this idea will become clearer once we discuss the very meager plot of the play. In the play, you have two major characters, Hemakant and Lalita, and you also have 5 women who are minor characters in the play, 5 women who are from the neighboring village. And Lalita has spent most of her life, all her life, in a stone mansion, in a wooden mansion, not a stone mansion, a wooden mansion. And her brother, Hemakant, has returned after 15 years from having spent his life in Europe as a traveling person who has deprived himself of all comforts. He leads a very poor life, traveling for the sake of trying to find an artistic, trying to make his fortunes in the field of art. So he struggles, and he is still struggling, but he has completely given up on all social ties. He relinquishes his privileged childhood, his privileged upbringing, all for the sake of art and artistic expression. So and Lalita, on the other hand, has spent who's much younger she's 15 years younger to Hemakant. She has spent all her life trapped in a wooden mansion, and her adoptive father, Dada Saheb, also abandons the mansion in pursuit of his own education. And there is a belief that there is a sin on the generations of people who have lived at the mansion have been cursed. Because the mansion itself rests on the bodies of a beggar woman and her child, and it's the only wealthy symbol of elite culture, elite society in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and a village. And so the space of the mansion itself becomes quite symbolic in terms of how insecure the foundations of this elite mansion are, because it's built on the remains of a beggar woman and her child, and there's a curse on the lineage of the various generations of people who have lived there, because apparently no one has ever managed to have their own child. Every time a child was born, it died, and so there was this. So every generation of parents were compelled to actually adopt a child. So all the children are adoptive children, and Dada Saheb apparently also leaves the mansion because he wants Lalita to survive. So he doesn't want her to die, and Hemakant also abandons his adoptive father and in search of his fortunes as an artist. But much to the disapproval of his father, who doesn't want him to become an artist, considering they come from a very privileged upper caste background, that he cannot stand the thought of his son becoming an artist. So there is he rebels against his father and he leaves, and he leads the life of a wandering artist in Europe, while his sister is trapped and is taken care of by an ayah, a nanny, and there are some other men who work in the house who take care of her. And but she is completely trapped. I mean, she's only seen an old photo of Hemakant when he was a small boy, and she hardly remembers him because she was just 5 years old when her brother left the house. And the ayah also is dismissed from her work for having secretly shown her the photo of her brother. So she has grown up with absolutely no social ties whatsoever. She has led a very protected but terribly lonely life in the mansion. And when Hemakant comes back, the play begins with their reunion after many years later, and I mean, anyone who read the play would think that they are lost lovers who have been reunited, and that's exactly what happens, because even though they are an adoptive brother-sister duo, there is this sexual passion between them, which suggests that the bond itself is illicit and incestuous, but and this is actually what spells the destruction of both the characters towards the end of the play. Now, Hemakant is a very skilled sculptor, right? And so he works with stone. Their mansion is the only wooden structure in the entire space, while everything around them is made of stone. They're surrounded by rocks, with lots of rocks. It's a very rocky landscape, and so they are surrounded by stones and rocks. And Hemakant wants to actually capture Lalita's beauty and youth in his stone sculptures, right? And so a lot of the conversations that happen early on in the various, there are about 7 scenes. The play has been divided into 7 scenes, and every scene describes the building passion between the two characters, although in many ways Lalita and Hemakant are quite different they're both isolated in their own unconscious desires for the absolute, for transcending their own individual isolation, their own loneliness, their own limitations. So while Hemakant wants to actually express Lalita's youthful beauty in his artistic creations, and in some sense tries to also rise above himself through his art, and there's a certain authoritarianism which is evident in both these characters. So Lalita is deeply in love with Hemakant, although initially she is a bit scared to actually look at him or love him. I mean, she's a bit she's rather terrorized at the prospect of loving Hemakant in the dark, especially in the dark mansion, and so she doesn't want to look at him, even as he encourages her to look at him. And she almost has this slavish, obsessive love for Hemakant. She doesn't want to let go of him, and he is the only one she has. So she is willing to do anything to have him. But he maintains an apparently dispassionate, distanced attitude towards Lalita. He doesn't. He's completely engrossed, engaged in his personal, private, individual life as an artist, and so he doesn't really seem to reciprocate her feelings, her vulnerability. Right? I mean, he seems rather guarded. He doesn't want to actually get hurt by his experience of love or his experience of life. He doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. Much like the men in Garbo, who do not want to take responsibility for Garbo's unborn child, but they want to ensure that each one is the father of the child, and thereby gain some kind of collective salvation through the birth of a son. And here similarly you have an artist, Hemakant, who's in some sense wants to, in his quest for creative fulfillment, turns the woman, in this case Lalita, into an embodiment of his desire, and in the process also destroys her, but also tries to cut himself free of her. Right? So you create an object called woman, which you idealize and you embody, and who's an embodiment of your own desire. And in this case, the sculptor also makes her, atrophies her flesh, her body. There are many scenes where Hemakant is constantly asking Lalita to, assume different postures and different gestures, so that he can capture her raw, vital passion in his stone sculptures. But in the process of doing that, he also isn't really interested in her as a person. He's not interested in her feelings. He doesn't reciprocate her feelings, and he's not interested in her mind. For him, her body is the only reality that is apparent and that can be captured in all its vitality in his stone sculptures. So he doesn't want to get too close to her. Right? He just wants her to be able to, he almost sees his stone sculpture in her. It's almost like as though she were a living embodiment of his own artistic creations. And so that in itself is, what draws him to Lalita. He is also his unconscious, that takes the form of art, artistic creation, is a very autocratic space. There's no room for anybody else in his artistic creation, right? It's only him, and so the unconscious itself, the unconscious mind, as Soumik Bandyopadhyay again says in the introduction, the unconscious mind itself is the site of a drama between the perverse and aberrant nature of sexual impulses. In this case, also an incestuous bond between brother and sister, and the kind of oppressive, repressive social norms that the mind, the heart, the unconscious internalizes. Right? So you internalize certain social, cultural norms that inform patriarchal society, but it also rebels against these norms, expresses this rebellion against social norms in the form of art. And the woman is an embodiment of this artistic endeavor, and she becomes also further the site of this struggle between oppressive social norms and the rebelliousness, the rebellion against those norms. Right? So the woman remains the site of both exploitation and domination in this play. And towards the end towards the middle of the play, we discover that Lalita has also bears Hemakant's child, and so she's been feeling rather left out and neglected by Hemakant, who has not been reciprocating her feelings, and has been completely engaged engrossed in his art, in his sculptures, that she, as it were, almost taking revenge, says that I am also an artist in my own right. I'm creating a child. I'm creating your child, right? And so but she gives birth to a dead child, right? So it's to her it seems like as though she's expiating for the sin she has committed of having an illicit relationship with her own brother, for which she believes she is being punished. And the only way that she can actually expiate her sin is to remain in the state of sin, as she says. So she now has this illicit child, but the child is born dead, and it seems to realize or confirm the curse that has been placed on these generations of families who have lived in the wooden mansion, who that they will never have a child of their own. Their lineage is always under the threat of being annihilated, exterminated, right? And so the child that is born dead, and the child is sold to a beggar, who takes the child for a lot of money and then probably buries the child. But there is this, and when she, there's a scene also later on where she meets the 5 women in the village, and she sees the child of the newborn child of one of the women who has come to get the child, have the child blessed by the goddess in the temple. And but when so she admires the child, and she sings a beautiful song to the child. But when the other women come in, they are shocked and disgusted by the sight, and they scold the woman for giving her child to Lalita, and they ask her to take the child back because they think that Lalita is a curse, will be a curse to the child, because she's herself, a sinner, someone who has had a child out of an illicit union. And so they also think that she's a curse. She marks ill fortune for them, because she has lived in a mansion that has not seen any life. So she's driven away, and then you see also society in the form of the villagers who live around the mansion, completely harassing her, stoning her and Hemakant for the life that they've led, the ignoble life, the illicit lives that they've led. And Lalita is reduced to tatters, and now she has no choice but to turn to prostitution to survive. And that is when, and then when Hemakant meets her, he's very upset and sorry to see her in this state, and he also undergoes a transformation when his sculptures are destroyed by the villagers. So he has made several stone sculptures surrounding the mansion, but they're all destroyed by the villagers, and that's when he realizes that everything is fake. His own artistic creations are fake. The stone that he thought was his medium, his beloved medium, is fake. It does not actually give him an accurate representation of the feeling, the loving body, right? The body which is not just a mere body, but also is an embodies a subject who can feel, who can love, who can care. And so it does not seem to be an authentic representation of the embodied self, and so it's destroyed. And that's when he realizes that he identifies with Lalita's own pain of having given birth to a dead child, and now he realizes what it must feel like to be an artist who has created something that is dead, that is lifeless. And so he thought that he could actually embody Lalita in all her vitality, in all her authenticity through stone, in his stone sculptures, but that's exactly what he fails to do by the end of the play. And so the two characters end up being trapped in their own mutually destructive passion that initially took the form of artistic creation as an embodiment of the rebellion against social norms, but then of course ends up destroying itself in the process. Now let's just go to some of the specific passages in the play that will give you a better sense of how of the thematic shifts in the play. So if you look at the first scene of Desire in the Rocks, you have a description of the reunion between Hemakant and Lalita after many years. There is this deep sense of longing that Lalita has for Hemakant when she sees him, and she is happy to see that there's at least one person in this world whom she recognizes, and she's just happy to have anyone, especially Hemakant, to redeem her lonely life. So we learn in the initial scene that Dada Saheb, the adoptive father, had willed all his property to Lalita, but she has no right over the property because it's the trustees of the house who manage the property, right? So she is quite powerless in the house, and Initially, Lalita is quite terrified. I mean, she's gotten so used to living alone in this dark house that she's not used to the presence of a man in the same house. And it's probably this deep sense of isolation and loneliness that enables her to eventually open up to Hemakant and completely surrender herself to him. She's willing to offer everything that she has to him in exchange for some love and comfort. And so she doesn't seem to be too concerned with the fact that he is her brother after all. So she just wants to be happy. She wants to share her life with someone. And she later remembers him, recognizes him as her brother. She was 5 years old. She was wearing a pink frock, as Hemakant remembers. Hemakant remembers her, and he says that I remembered a fair-skinned girl, 5 years old, wearing a pink frock, watching me from behind the aya's pallu. That's the memory he had of her. So when she was 5, he was 20, and he remembers her from that time. And Lalita remembers being scared of him, and she still seems to be a little terrorized by the possibility of having to love someone in the dark house, and she's not able to actually entirely open up to him initially. She can only remember her lonely days in the house. She remembers the huge portrait of their mother who died earlier. She also remembers the old photograph of Hemakant when he was a small boy that the ayah had secretly shown her. She remembers living in a room of her own with all the other rooms of the mansion locked. Even the servants were forbidden to enter the room, and the ayah who had shown the photo of the boy secretly to her loses her job. So she's completely trapped in that mansion. Hemakant also tells her that he had been wandering through alien lands, through Europe, starving, driven by a single obsession, art, and that he had completely fought against the bitter cold with nothing but rags on my back. Not once did I think of the comforts of this place. So he has given up all the privileges of a comfortable lifestyle of the place, in the mansion, and he has left everything for art. He left of his own free will, he says, and much against the anger and disapproval of his father, who does not want his son to become an artist. And so from the very beginning, Hemakant appears to be someone who is absolutely detached and dispassionate about life. He is only concerned about his own artistic creation. And Hemakant now initially wants Lalita to be his muse, his inspiration for his artistic endeavors. And so we see initially several moments in the play where he is trying to, it's not like as though he's in love with her, but he wants her to assume different postures so that he can capture her youth, her vitality in his sculptures. And Lalita, in some sense, misunderstands that, and she mistakes his attention for love and for desire. So he tells Lalita that let me call you Queen and Lali, or whatever else I want to. I love you. Come to me. Lalita, why? Hemakant, I'm going to carve you in stone. Lalita, me? Hemakant, yes. Lalita, why? Hemakant, because you are ravishing and because I love you. Lalita, don't. Hemakant, why not? Lalita, don't. Hemakant, why not? Lalita, don't carve me in stone. Hemakant, what? Lalita, I'll be imprisoned in them forever. Hemakant, you'll become immortal. My hands will carve you in these rocks, and my hands too will become immortal with you. Right, so the intention here, and Lalita seems to already anticipate Hemakant's intention, which is to petrify Lalita in his sculptures. He's not responding to her, the emotions, the heart that lies behind the body, right? The woman who is yearning for company and for comfort and for love. But he is more drawn to her desiring self, right? Which he then wants to capture in his sculptures, right? So he's not interested in desiring her, but he's more entranced, drawn to her desiring self, right? And that's exactly what he is trying to capture in his sculptures. And Lalita does not want to be imprisoned by his sculptures. And she constantly says it would be a sin It would be a sin for me, for my soul to be naked before you. Right? Your eyes will see all of me, your hands will mold me. That can't happen. I feel it's a sin, she says. Right? So the very act of capturing his sister in a sculpture would require her to be exposed and vulnerable, and she does not want to be vulnerable to her own brother. Right? And she thinks that it's a sin. Right? That it would be a sin, it would be a realization of a curse that has been placed on their family, for her to be then stripped, metaphorically stripped before her own brother, and become this object of an artistic creation. But the artistic creation, the art itself is not a form of sublimation for Hemakant. Hemakant does not manage to channelize his desire and love for Lalita into art. Art becomes more a way of atrophying the skin, the body of Lalita in the play. Right? So she is just transformed, translated into a stone sculpture. And it's almost like as though Hemakant also has a very erotic relationship with his own artistic work. So it's not, you can't think of it as a sublimation where you will be able to transfer your sexual, your libido, your sexual energy from the object of your desire to something else like art. So he is constantly touching her. He touches her on her head. He feels her beautiful black silky hair, which he wants to bring alive in his sculptures. And but whenever Lalita yearns for or longs for him, he recedes, he retracts. So it's a constant game that Hemakant seems to be playing, of on the one hand beckoning her to assume certain postures for him to capture in his sculpture, but you know, he always then withdraws exactly at the moment when she wants him to open up, to be vulnerable, to reciprocate her feelings, right? So it's a kind of sexuality which Soumik Bandyopadhyay says never seems to accept itself on its own terms, right? It's only treated as another means, as a means to sculpting yet another form, right? So any kind of sexual longing or desire that Lalita has for Hemakant is only being transformed or translated, transubstantiated into the stone sculpture. Right? So you never see reciprocation. It's never a mutual act. It's you never acquire a sense of sexual identity between the two characters. They remain rather isolated and trapped within their own autocratic worlds, where each seems to reign supreme. Right? So Hemakant seems to reign supreme in his world of art, in which nobody else has any space. Right? He is the supreme, and he is the only one there. He's willing to actually accept isolation. He's willing to give up social ties for the sake of art. And you have Lalita, who opens up, who is willing to expose herself, who wants to be vulnerable, who wants to have Hemakant at any cost, but also in the process ends up being rather possessive and demanding. Right? So she's slavish on one hand. She's willing to, she self-abnegates herself. She's always, she almost seems servile in her love for him, and she's willing to do anything it takes for him to reciprocate her love. But she also wants to possess him and have him. Right? It's almost like as though she is competing for him with his art. And of course, later on, she also accuses Hemakant of being incapable of feeling. He is not an artist in the first place. He is a fake. He's an inauthentic and artificial artist, because he's incapable of feeling and loving. Right? So how can an artist who is incapable of feeling and loving capture another person's feelings, capture her feelings in the form of a stone sculpture? Right? So she realizes very early on that he is a very dispassionate and unfeeling person. So much as he wants to bring her to life, it's his unconscious impulses, it's his unconscious projections onto Lalita, which he then actually wants to bring to life through his sculptures, right? So she's just merely an object of his own desire, right? An embodiment of his own desire, which he then wants to transform into stone art. But she's always scared of being trapped by his sculptures. She doesn't want to be trapped. She already feels trapped in that wooden mansion. Imagine being trapped and frozen in stone sculptures. So for Hemakant, he says later on, much like what happens in Garbo, that the body seems to be the only reality. It's not the mind, it's not the heart. It's the body. It's the manifest physical body which seems to be the only reality for Hemakant, not what lies beneath or what accompanies the body, right? It's not the mind, right? So when Lalita brings up the mind, brings up the question of her own feelings, her own heart, he's not concerned. He says, don't corrupt the experience of the artistic experience, right? But for Lalita, the sexual experience comes with emotion, right? With vulnerability. But it also comes with this deep sense of possession, of wanting to possess, of wanting to rule over him. So there are various lines which suggest Lalita's slavish, possessive desire and love for Hemakant. Look, Hem, I've raised both my arms, now help me up. You're cruel, stubborn, self-centered, selfish. How sweet you are, cruel and sweet. Hem, what will you take to smile a little? Don't go without smiling, kiss me. Soothe this excruciating pain, then leave. Then when he doesn't respond to her attentions, again she says, Hem, I want to enter your eyes, deep into them. I'll become a tiny drop of blood and travel through your body, through your heart, brain, mind, soul. I'll talk to all your secrets, discover all your dreams. Then I'll turn into a tiny pupil and live in your eyes. Will you let me? Right? So this is the other line where she wants to become a part of him. She wants to internalize him. She wants him to internalize her so that they can become one. And she also takes the authorship. She also claims authority and authorship over his stone sculptures. She says that if it hadn't been for me, these sculptures would not have existed. So you have to love me. I am the original. They are the replicas. They are the copies of me, right? So, but then he says that she is absolutely substitutable, right? If it had not been for her, then some other woman would have posed for him. And that, of course, makes her feel rather unloved and insulted. So she says, I say to those sculptures, hello Lali, how are you? How do you feel out here in the sun? Then she asks Hemakant, why did you make the sculptures outside the village where it is deserted? Who will come to see them there? Hemakant, the whole world will come. Are stone things to be kept in houses to destroy their beauty? They must stand in the open air, on hills, plains. I'm going to create a whole forest of sculptures, Lali. Lalita, a forest of lalis? See how many images I have given you of me, and look at you. You won't do one thing to please me. And so this is constant back and forth, constant drama, which is a struggle to achieve absolute power over the other. This is passion, which is constantly, dramatizing this desire for absolute power over the other. Right. So Lalita wants him all for herself. She feels neglected by and jealous of his works of art. She feels completely left out and shut out from his artistic world, in which she seems to have no space, and she wants him for herself. Right? But she struggles, but he remains rather passive and dispassionate. Right? So she, for example, he's only interested in. There's a moment where he asks her to open her lips, right? Because he wants to make a sculpture of her with her lips slightly open. But she wants him to kiss her on the lips. She wants him to feel her agony and feel the same agony. Right? She says, there, kiss my big toe. Now the other toes. And he kisses them too. The foot he does, and she laughs out. Slave, slave, you're my slave. What shall I do? What can I do for you? I want to be your slave. Here, kiss my hands. Thumb, he does. Fingers, he does. The palm, he does. Hands, he does. I'm going to faint. So obviously he doesn't seem to be doing it out of his own volition. He's not doing it because he loves her or desires her, but because he wants to be able to evoke through his presence and through his sculptures, the sense of the deep, passionate sense of longing that exists within Lalita. Then again she says, I'll give you anything to hear this over and over again, right? Because when he says that she's beautiful, she says, Haim, take me in my entirety, take me in every place at every moment, here in the house, in the open, under crashing rain, with stabs of lightning burning our bodies, in the raging sun, on the hard black ground cracking with the heat, under dense trees dripping starlight, in mute profound darkness, in thick forests, on the banks of streams, on enormous boulders, and so on. And then Hemakant says, yes, in all places, at all times, I will take you in all your moods. I will store them up in every drop of my blood and bring them alive again in stone upon stone. Lali of the brimming, vulnerable eyes, Lali tossing from side to side with the exquisite pain of fulfillment, Lali of the full, inviting lips, Lali of the breasts heaving with emotion, Lali of the navel as deep as desire, Lali of the long, long thighs trembling with irresistible lust. I am going to embed it all in stone, the physical manifestations of pure desire, primeval, elemental, the eternal beauty and vitality of woman, the heady light of passion that surges and overflows through every pore of your body will fill and flow out of every pore of my sculptures. The desire that palpitates in your every sinew will be seen breathing in my sculptures. This indestructible, eternal passion can be embedded only in another indestructible, eternal thing, in my sculptures, in art. Right? So you see that Lali is only an ideal of desire, of his own unconscious desire, and that is what is actually being frozen and captured forever in art. And so he believes that his art will immortalize Lali and immortalize him, and that's the initial impression. But Lalita is actually extremely disillusioned. She realizes that he is not able to capture what she actually feels. She doesn't know because he doesn't allow himself to feel. He's too dispassionate and too detached to be able to feel her agony, her longing, her passion. So for Hemakant, it's purely a physical experience, which has to be experienced in its purity. But for Lalita, she's unhappy. She's disappointed that he's not able to capture her heart and her mind and her feelings for him. Again, in the middle of scene 3, Hemakant is very angry that she's trying to control him. Right? And she says, you're making me pay full price for it. You want to swallow my soul itself. You want to pluck my life and wear it in your hair. You don't want me to draw breath without your permission. I must accept being imprisoned within your sight. So it's almost like as though she is now the artist who's trying to imprison Hemakant within her own love, right? Almost immortalize him, petrify him through her love and her longing for him, right? Her desire to possess him. Later on in scene 3, Lalita berates Hemakant for being inhuman. Right? She says that, how dare you behave like this? I gave you my all without thinking twice. How dare you spit on it? You'll have to pay for it one day. You will have to pay the full price for this one day. My rage won't go waste. My curse is on you. Don't laugh. Don't hide your inadequacy under laughter. This is after Hemakant laughs at her curse. Artist indeed, artist my foot. You aren't even human. Your body is filled sawdust, and a heart as lifeless as those stones of yours. Spends the entire day chipping at stones. You don't even have the skill of a mason in your hands. You're a mere stone breaker. But Hemakant says, you're only good for that love stuff. Don't get into art and creation. It's beyond you. And then she says, where am I in your revolting statues, which you call works of art? Right? Not mine. Where am I in them? Where is Lali in them? They're all statues of shameless sluts sitting in obscene postures. Lali is not a slut like them. Lali, who gives all of herself, is not like this, revolting, obscene. So it's obviously, the play is actually complicating the whole idea of art representing life. Right? Can art actually represent life? Can life ever be in all its complexities and in all its ambiguities? Is it possible to capture life in art? Right? What does it mean to represent something accurately? She says, you have to be born a true human being. I am true. My blood is true. It's alive. Its impulses are true. They're alive. What can I not understand? Do I not merit even this much, having traveled through fire, burning everything behind me? Why are you deceiving yourself? You know it yourself. That is why you sit staring at your work for hours in despair. Creation is not such an easy thing. right? And so that is when he challenges her to create a sculpture, a poem, a song, or a painting. She says that I am going to have a baby, right? And she says all women are greater than artists, right? Because they feel for that child that they have created, and they know what the child feels. Hemakant thinks that she's trying to trap her with this talk of motherhood. She's trying to ask him to take responsibility for his child, but then he seems to be rather detached. He even threatens to leave her and abandon her with her child. But she says, my child needs you, right? And you also need him. And then in scene 4 is that scene, the encounter between Lalita and the women of the village, where she holds the child of one of the women, and she sings the baby a very beautiful song. But then the other women who are disapprove of this meeting, and they ask her to leave because they think that she is an evil woman, an accursed woman, right, who has had a sinful relationship with Hemakant, who has borne a child out of wedlock and lives in a mansion that has been cursed for generations, right? So they don't want their child also to be cursed. It's in scene 5 that Lalita gives birth to a dead child and gives the child away to a beggar, and she believes that she has sinned for her relationship with Hemakant, and now she has to expiate her sins by having an equally sinful, being in an equally sinful profession. Right? So she's upset that she's lost her only child, who was born dead. And she also feels that she is paying for her sinful relationship by bearing a dead child, and despite the fact that she loved the child as her own, but she could not bring it back to life. Again, Lalita here believes that she has to pay for having transgressed social norms and social conventions, and so she decides to get away from the mansion, and she wanders around for a long time, and she ends up becoming a prostitute. Right? While Hemakant also has undergone a transformation, because all his sculptures are destroyed and broken down by the villagers, and Lalita is now shocked to see that Hemakant also needs her. Right? He seems to have, this is when on page 125, in the middle of scene 6, Hemakant tells Lalita that these sculptures are not true. I'm not true either. I'm very false. It came to me suddenly that night when the people were smashing them one by one. I was watching from afar. The enraged mob was breaking the sculptures limb by limb. Not once did I feel that I should rush in to save them. I was so terrified I ran for my life, afraid that they would take my life too. Finally, I stopped somewhere. My head cooled down. Then my mind stirred and posed the question, why did you do that? The answer was easy. I was a coward. I did not myself believe in what I had created. Those sculptures were false. False. That is what they all are. Ugly, loathsome. I see them now. Suddenly, I'm defeated, Lali. Why? Why did this happen? I wanted to depict pure desire in all its aspects, but what came out was mechanical, hideous, filthy, totally unconnected with what had been in my mind. Can there be such a difference between what the mind sees and the hand does? Why does this happen? Yet these naked statues are alive. Their falseness is alive. Their obscenity is alive. They look back at me tauntingly and say, we are yours, part of your blood, your mind, your life. You cannot deny us. And I don't. There's no place now where I can lay my head. And now, for the first time, he actually identifies with Lalita's loss. He now realizes what it must have felt like to give birth to a dead child, just like how all his creations have been destroyed. And Lalita says that you only wanted to erect a wall around you in self-defense. You refused to get involved with life. You were always guarded, aloof, to make sure that you didn't suffer a single scratch. You wanted life's warmth without burning your fingers, but life always has its revenge in the end. Its blow has fallen on you all on a sudden. That's why you have collapsed. You only observed the objective reality. You never ever reached the pure light of truth that lay buried under the outer shell of reality. You weren't willing to pay the price of burning yourself up totally in the process of getting there. Like the pain in their heart, there's an aching truth at the center of every reality. You never laid your lips to it to absorb it, because you did not wish to pay the price of giving up your life to the agony of that poison. Haim, it doesn't help to deny life. You must accept it first and then cut the strings. Otherwise, it sits on your back forever. So what the truth is, what the truth of life is, it's not something which is answered in the play. It remains a rather ineluctable pursuit, right? But it's also true that both these characters, especially Hemakant, is completely trapped, is completely walled by his own artistic world, his own idealism, right? And so he's unable to get out of that idealism, to be able to expose himself, to be able to take responsibility, to be able to accept pain and suffering in life, right? Because to love someone requires you to be willing to be vulnerable, to give up your rights, and have that willingness to be hurt, right? So he doesn't want to get hurt, right? So which is why he's up to this point, he remains a rather dispassionate and detached man. But it's only at this point and towards the end of the play that Hemakant gives up a little bit on his ego, right? He opens up finally when his sculptures are destroyed, and he's freed of the idealism of his art, right? And so he realizes now that he has to surrender to the fact of life, which is suffering and pain and hurt. So even though Lalita tells him that he didn't go to the source of the desire, he doesn't know the truth about desire, what this truth is remains an endless pursuit for both the characters in the play. Hemakant asks her whether he would have found the truth through art, and she replies, "Who says so? Where have I found the truth? Perhaps nobody finds it at any time, but that doesn't mean we are permitted to deny it. Our ineluctable destiny is to wander in search of it forever." And that is how it ends, because she feels that she has sinned, she has become a prostitute, and he suddenly feels responsible for her plight, right? So it's that new sense of responsibility, that new sense of that willingness to be hurt, to be vulnerable in love, is what actually enables Hemakant to break the walls that he has created around himself. There is a certain dissolving of the autocratic authoritarianism which separates him from Lalita towards the end. So he also becomes vulnerable, his idealism is dissolved, and Lalita herself feels that she has been cursed. She lives the abject life of a prostitute, and they are both in some sense. Towards the end, of course, she's in tatters because the villagers have stoned Hemakant until he bleeds, and Lalita has been humiliated, and she's had her head shaved and she's in tatters, and so the two of them end their life in the mansion, right? So the mansion itself becomes that space of mutual self-destruction. Right, so it completely collapses under the weight of their own passion, of this very drama between the oppressive social norms of society and the untrammeled passions of illicit desire, which in the process of expressing themselves, of transgressing, end up destroying themselves. Right, so there's a kind of self-destruction which is inherent to this relentless pursuit of human pleasure, of this objective of human pleasure to create the absolute, to be free of all limitations, to be beyond the given, the real, the physical, right? To be able to produce something which is transcendental and ideal. So that's it. Thank you.